TPRM in one slide. So on the left-hand side here, you have all of your third parties from business process outsourcers, technology providers, consultants, legal counsel, marketing and advertisement. Any type of third party that you're outsourcing services or purchasing goods from can be considered a third party to your organization. So every company is going to have their own set of third parties that they're going to consider in scope or applicable for their third-party risk management program. We have that here on the left side. And on the right side are going to be all your applicable risks that you're concerned about. So of this list, cybersecurity, information security, privacy is typically always going to be there. Business continuity, financial health, sustainability. Those are the risks that you're going to apply to your program. And then in the middle here is the foundation, the foundational areas of your third-party risk and really the third-party life cycle from planning to termination. So we'll go into more details around those foundational areas and the vendor life cycle on next slides, but this is really a holistic picture of third-party risks in one. So looking at the TPRM foundational components, anytime we're looking at an organization and want to see how their third-party risk management program is, these are going to be the 6 kind of pillars that we really look at to kind of see how they're doing. So starting from the left, we have governance and oversight. So governance and oversight is really going to be about the overall program vision, the goals of your organization, how you want to manage your risk, what's your risk appetite, what's your operating model, who's going to be part of this third-party risk program, what are their roles and responsibilities, how do you engage with stakeholders from the business, and how are you doing awareness and training with those business stakeholders. So governance and oversight is really the key foundation and really that the tone from the top of your organization to show that leadership is really involved and invested in your third-party risk management program. The second pillar here is policies and procedures. Once you have your roles and responsibilities, your governance model, you really want to define the policies and the standards and the procedures that everyone, all the key stakeholders and the business owners are going to leverage to go through this third-party risk management program. Making sure that those policies and standards are accessible to everyone so that they're aware of the program, they understand the requirements is a really key important part of maturing your program and making sure that you have consistency across your organization. The third pillar here is third-party inventory. So this is not just like having a list of all of your third parties, but it's really about the management of that list and what data attributes you're also capturing with that third-party inventory. So obviously you want to know who your third parties are, but you want to have an understanding of what business units or business owners are owning that relationship with the third party. And then we'll typically see some segmentation here around different attributes such as, spend, maybe their overall risk score, region, like location that the third party is providing services. So there's a lot of information that goes into your third-party inventory that's really going to help your risk teams take a look at a holistic view and really be able to understand the overall risk to your organization from your third-party landscape. Another thing about the third-party inventory, you want to make sure that there's an intake process to really onboard new third parties that's consistent, and also how you look to manage it. Third parties relationships end. Sometimes they're renewed or they expand their services to different departments. So how you're keeping that information up to date is a big part of your third-party inventory as well. The fourth pillar here is risk modeling. So in the risk modeling pillar, this is where we would typically see companies identify what risks are important to them and going to be included in their third-party risk management program. So cybersecurity, privacy, business continuity, having all of that established, and then having like an inherent risk score that really takes a look at all of those areas and can kind of give a high level overall score and rate into your third parties. This will help you identify the third parties that are critical, high risk, medium risk versus low risk. So that way you're focusing your time on the highest risk third parties. The critical and the high risk ones are the ones that you're going to want to spend majority of your time on. And the medium risk and low risk, each organization will kind of make a determination of, for the low risk ones, do we even need to do an assessment, or is the risk low enough that we feel comfortable with that assessment? So that's really your risk modeling, looking at your inherent risk. From a residual risk, once you complete your assessment and you take into consideration any controls that organization or that third party has in place, you'll have your residual risk rating. And the residual risk rating can really help drive kind of your reassessment schedule or other action items that need to be performed from a third-party risk monitoring perspective. The fifth pillar here is around your control assessment and finding management. So as you identify your inherent risks that matter to you, you want to make sure that you have some type of process to really understand the third party's control effectiveness. And typically what we see is this is through a combination of questionnaire and documentation requests sent to the third party for them to provide responses, perhaps provide their SOC 2 or ISO certifications if they have any, to really collect that information and get an understanding of their control environment and some level of comfortability that they can mitigate or minimize the risks that they're posing to your organization. In addition to doing the assessment, the next step is really what do you do with that information? So we kind of really focus here on findings management as well. Anytime you're identifying any issues or control gaps with your third party, how are those issues being tracked and monitored? How are they being shared with the third party so that they can take action and either remediate it, or how can the business accept the risk? So how are you tracking that risk for the third party? And really looking to have that holistic view of, from information security, from privacy, these are all the open findings that we have with the third party that may impact your business decisions on how you move forward with that third party. The last pillar here is around automation and continuous monitoring. So really the first 5 pillars is your governance, your process that you have here. And once you have that built out, how can you leverage technology and automation to make your process more effective, user-friendly, and how can you really get the most out of your program? So really, once you have that process in place, then you can find technology and tools that are really going to make your program a lot more effective and efficient, and kind of consistent across the board. So there are tools and technology, which I'll dive in deeper later on in the session on different technology that's out there, but really lets you do a lot of dashboarding, reporting, and then also leveraging external data sources. There's a lot of available information out there around financial health, geopolitical risk, sanctions, anti-bribery, even around environmental and social scores. So there's a lot of information that can be leveraged out there to enhance your overall third-party risk management program. At the bottom here, you can see the stakeholder continuum. So third-party risk management is always going to involve a lot of different key stakeholders, from procurement, information security, finance is going to be involved, legal. It's not just going to be completely owned by one business unit that does everything. There's always going to be collaboration between the different risk functional groups. to have a holistic TPRM program. And then the last piece here is the business. The business is always going to be the first line of defense. They're the ones that own the relationship with the vendor. So making sure that they're included in this process is going to be a very key step to making sure that your third-party risk management program is successful. So this slide just goes deeper into that assessment process that I was, speaking about on the previous slide. From left to right, the first step is really having an intake request. So making sure that you have a common process to really onboard or initiate your third-party risk management program is going to be a key step here. A lot of times we see that business owners sometimes get confused of, hey, when do I need to reach out to procurement? When do I need to include information security? Who do I need to talk to at legal? There's a lot of different forms that they might need to fill out to engage those different stakeholders. And it really makes the process confusing and sometimes burdensome for them. So they start to take, they try to cheat the system or cut corners. So as much as we can have one intake request that really gathers all of that required information for those key stakeholders, it really makes it a lot easier for the business. They know what's required of them, they know where they need to go, and it helps ensure that all new third parties are going through that process. You can see here after the intake request, we have a little bar here for pre-screening. So typically what we'll see here is organizations will leverage some of those external data around financial health, maybe around some information security scores, some geopolitical risk ratings, to see if there's any red flags, immediate red flags that might cause some concern leveraging that third party. So that pre-screening can really help identify if there's any third parties that you really shouldn't be doing business with. However, it's not the final say. So a lot of times it could just be helpful information to help you do a deeper dive into your assessment. The second step here is that risk profiling inherent risk process that I was mentioning. So typically what we would see is some type of questionnaire that's answered by the business owner, that person who understands that vendor relationship, that's engaged with that third party. Completing out a questionnaire that includes all of your different risks. So questions around information security, questions around privacy, reputation, business continuity. They'll complete that questionnaire, and there's some type of methodology or scoring behind that questionnaire that's going to help identify if this a critical risk third party, high risk third party, medium risk, and low risk. That scoring and methodology is important because it helps make that process consistent for every third party that goes through the program. Those risk ratings are also, as I mentioned, a really good way for organizations to help prioritize what third parties they want to assess and spend more time with. Taking a risk-based approach is going to be a really key important part of developing your third-party risk management program. Every organization is going to struggle with having resources and funding to assess every third party that they do business with. So really making that business decision of, hey, these are the third parties we want to talk to on an annual basis, on every 2 years, versus these are the third parties that the risk is low enough that maybe we do one assessment or maybe an assessment's not even required. At the same time, that inherent risk screening or that inherent risk assessment can really help drive what control assessment needs to be triggered for that third party. Having a single dynamic questionnaire really makes it easier for the third party, so that way different teams within your organization aren't reaching out to the third party, leveraging, one's using a form, one's using Excel versus another team using a tool. If you can really have your questionnaire be dynamic, so you're only asking the questions that are applicable based off of the risk, and send it to the vendor in one single form, it allows them to really prioritize, work on that whole questionnaire, respond to it, provide the documentation, and send it back as a whole package. The fourth step here is that issue management and reporting. So like I mentioned, once you get that control assessment back and you complete your review, If there's any identified issues, you want to make sure that you're documenting them, sharing them with the business owner, sharing them with the vendors so that they can determine what the appropriate risk treatment is. Do they want to accept the risk? Are they going to remediate? Is there some other mitigation in place, or do they want to avoid the risk altogether? And then you can also see here, we have residual risk scoring. So residual risk is you take your inherent risk and you consider the control effectiveness, and you kind of subtract that score and you'll get a residual risk rating. Your residual risk rating is typically always going to be lower than your inherent risk screening. You shouldn't really see the score go higher. Your inherent risk really takes into consideration what the risk is when there's no controls, and then your residual risk is the risk once you apply those controls. So leveraging your residual risk score, that's really going to help you kind of determine your ongoing monitoring and ongoing due diligence around your third party. Third parties that don't have very good control effectiveness, they have a lot of issues, their residual score is critical or high. You may want to take additional steps to monitor them more frequently, maybe perform reassessments more actively, or have quarterly touch bases with them around the open issues, and really make sure that they're improving their score and improving their control effectiveness over time. And then the last part of monitoring is, again, the external data and screening. So this can really be applied to all of your third parties, but in between completing those assessments, you still want to make sure that you're monitoring your third parties to identify if there's any issues. Most commonly, we see a lot of organizations leverage technology that can help determine if, for example, if an organization or one of their third parties has been impacted by a data breach, or if they're having financial health. There's some types of alerts or flags that are constantly monitoring your third parties and can raise flags to your organization so you can take appropriate next steps. This slide here is looking at the procurement lifecycle from planning, due diligence, contracting, to onboarding your new third party, ongoing monitoring, and even termination. I'm not going to go through everything on this slide, but the key takeaway here is all of these different activities in blue are third-party risk management activities. So from the time that a business wants to start planning to use a third party to the time that they terminate their relationship with that third party risk has involvement throughout that overall program. It's not just at the beginning piece when you're deciding what third party you want to leverage. It goes all the way through termination. One thing that I did want to talk about specifically for termination is there's also risk related to terminating a relationship, especially when it comes to information security and privacy. Did that third party have access to your information? Did they have access to your networks? What steps are being taken to make sure that that information is either returned, destroyed? What steps to make sure that that access is terminated so that it's no longer posing a risk to your organization? So it's not just that initial assessment, but it's really the full life cycle for third parties that you guys want to have your involvement in. So this slide is around different technology and tools that can be leveraged to really help automate your program. The first one here is government risk and compliance technology. Many of you are probably familiar with GRC tools that you might leverage internally for other risks, maybe vulnerability management. So GRC tools can also be leveraged for third-party risk management. And it really there's a lot of exciting technology out there that can really help kind of facilitate that whole assessment process. So your business owners can go into the tool, they can complete their inherent risk assessment, provide the information to onboard a new third party, Tools can do all of the scoring in the background. They can determine what's critical risk, what's high risk, what assessments need to go to the vendor. All of that can be built into your GRC technology. And then a lot of tools out there also have a portal for third parties, so where they can go in and securely provide responses, upload documentation, so that your team can complete your assessments. So a lot of organizations send out questionnaires via Excel, just through emails. Sometimes it's hard to track, send them reminders out to the third parties to complete it. So technology can really help take your organization to the next level. But one thing I do want to point out is the technology shouldn't really determine your process. You should define your program and your process and your requirements up front, and then find the right technology that's going to help support and manage and really help you manage your program. I'm going to skip down to the third one, analytics. That tool, that GRC tool, will have some reporting capabilities, but you can also use additional reporting tools to really help consolidate and understand risk from a holistic standpoint, and really being able to provide that information to the different key stakeholders. So the business is going to want to understand, hey, who are all the vendors I engage with? What are their risks? Which ones have open risks that we still need to work with? So they can see it from that perspective on what they own. But that analytics and reporting can also be leveraged by teams such as procurement, by the executives, when they're really looking to onboard and bring on new third parties. Is there a third party that we already have in our database that maybe we can leverage? They have great controls in place, we trust them, and leveraging that information as a value add back to the business as well. And then I've touched upon this a little bit already, but the external data sources, really there's a lot of great information out there around third parties, around organizations. So finding the right data sources that are going to give you information around your third parties is really going to make your life a lot easier. It's impossible for you to continuously monitor all of your third parties. So how can you leverage that external data and integrate it with your GRC tool and really have a holistic view of, hey, here's my assessment results. Here's the information that I'm pulling in around their financial health. Here's the information I'm pulling in around their geopolitical risk. Can I get that all into a holistic view and really understand my risk to one specific vendor in one place? This slide here just kind of goes into a lot of those external data sources. So you can see here that we have examples from information security, finance, geopolitical. There are paid sources that you can leverage and integrate with your program, but there's also a lot of public sources that you can leverage as well. Especially globally, there's a lot of government information out there that you can leverage. Public companies have their public financials available that you can leverage for some of your assessments as well. So there's a lot of different tools out there. It's just identifying which ones you care most about and what risks you care most about. And then you can go ahead and select what third parties, external data sources you want to leverage. So there's a lot of information there around building a third-party risk management program or enhancing program. So just wanted to kind of pause and kind of say, if you're looking at your organization, how can you improve your own third-party risk management program? These are some steps that you can take to really kind of step back and try to determine what areas of opportunity do we have to improve our internal program. So the first step that you're going to want to do is really do a current state assessment. Identify who are your key stakeholders, what risks are you currently doing, what are the policies and procedures governing your third-party risk program. Do you have a full list of your third-party inventory? Are you tracking all of your third parties? Have you performed assessments? Do you have your risk methodology? Take a look at all of those different pillars that I showed you previously, those third-party risk foundational pillars, and see how you're doing in each of those categories. The next step would be to define a roadmap. Where do you see your organization 2 years from now, 3 years from now? What risk are you including in your third party? Do you need to expand? Are you currently only focused on information security, or are you only focused on privacy? Once you identify where your target state is, then you can develop and really prioritize different enhancements to your program to get you to that next step. And then, of course, you want to pilot those enhancements, refine based off of the information that you obtain. And really, at this point, it's going to be your kind of continuous improvement. So using that historical information that you have, how can you make your program better? How can you make your program more efficient? What are the challenges or what are the gaps in your program that your organization cares about? And how can you improve there? This slide here is just some key questions for different stakeholders across your organization. Kind of bucketed here, we have procurement and supply chain at the top. We have your risk, your legal teams, internal audit as the second one. We have your CISOs in the third one, and then we have business owners in the fourth one. I'm not going to go through all of these questions, but as you guys get this material, these are things that your organization can kind of look at, and if you're able to answer these questions, can kind of help give you a sense of where your third-party program kind of lives along that maturity spectrum. Do you have a place to rank your third parties based on criticality and risk? Do you understand all of the issues that are coming out from your assessment? Do you have access to those issues from your third party? How do you get comfort on the control environment of your vendors? So if your organization is able to answer all these questions, has a very clear process, then you can understand that you're a little bit more mature in your program. If you're unable to answer these questions, then this might help guide you of some certain things that you might want to look at, to make improvements over the next couple months or the next couple years. And that's really the presentation for today. So really, hopefully there's a lot of good information there for you to take away and kind of reevaluate your third-party risk management program, understand the next steps that maybe you want to take to further improve your program.
Thank you, Nelson. So we have a couple of questions in the Q&A box. What we'll do is we'll have you take a couple of questions now, and then we will have the panel discussion a little later, which will address the remaining questions. But Nelson, if you could start with, we have a question from Carlos in the chat box. Basically, he's asking, what are your recommendations, best practices to manage vendor terminations and processes for any data that may need to be returned or destroyed? And what controls do you recommend to implement to ensure these processes are always happening?
Yep, so I think there's going to be collaboration when you're talking about termination between the privacy, legal, information security team. Like I mentioned, there's a lot of key things around access. So it's going to be different depending on the third party and how they're providing their service or their product. If they're storing your data or if they have access to your network, all of those things need to be considered to make sure that the data is either returned, that access to publicly facing websites or applications are shut off, access to your network. If there's individual access, for example, like consultants, a lot of times get accounts made for them. Are their accounts being terminated? So really, it's about the different risks. You're going to want to have like a checklist of, hey, here's all the different things that we need to kind of walk through when we terminate a vendor, and make sure that that checklist is all inclusive of all the different risks. So that way you can say, all right, this is not applicable to this relationship, or this one, these are the steps that we need to take for this relationship. Obviously, there's going to be some nuances, some challenges, perhaps, maybe the vendor is not responsive. or the contact that you guys had at that third party is has since left the company, or maybe it's an organization where all you can contact is like the sales team because that's all they have. You don't really have a contact. So at that point, that's where I would say you really want to work with your legal teams to determine what the next steps are and what you would do in those situations where you're really struggling with a third party. But really making sure that you have that overall checklist, you have a process defined, you're following that process and you're escalating when necessary, and you're documenting all of those steps. I would say that's really how you can improve that termination process.
Thank you. The next question is, how do you perform the inherent risk assessment?
Yep. So the inherent risk assessment, you're going to want the business owner, the person who's going to engage with that third party, to really be part of that process. So the inherent risk assessment can be broken down into different sections. It can have, a general section of, tell me what this third party is doing, how are they providing the service, what location they're providing the service from, general questions like that. And then you can have your sections that are very specific to information security, business continuity. For example, you can say, will this third party have access to our proprietary information? Will they have access to our network? So you'll have questions like that. And then based off of their response, their response can really drive that score of who's a critical third party, who's a high-risk third party. One thing to note is, the business owners aren't always going to be the most technical, individuals that you encounter. So some of them may require a little bit of hand-holding through the process, or at least like someone to review their responses to make sure that based off of the service that's being provided, did their responses really make sense? You always want to do a double check there, and maybe even have a conversation or a call with that business owner just to make sure that you're getting that risk right before you send out a control assessment to the vendor.
Thank you. And then we'll take one more, and then we'll, like I said, we'll have the panel address the rest of them throughout the rest of the event. But there was no mention of the SIG or the 800-53, and wondering why no mention of that, and if you have any thoughts there, because they can be modified as appropriate.
Yep, that's for companies that are just beginning their third-party risk management program. Leveraging something like the SIG is a really good way for them to kind of start off, and they can review those questions, identify, do we just want to send the full SIG, or do we want to send the SIG Lite, or do we want to tailor it and make it kind of our own assessment? That's definitely a good way for organizations to really initiate that program. But you also want to make sure that you're just not using like one assessment, because it's the SIG. You really want to make sure that you're kind of tailoring it to your organization, to your risk, to your sector. There are certain sectors out there that with their supplier base, they need their direct suppliers to meet certain environmental controls as well. So you can definitely leverage those types of questionnaires and assessments, but you just want to make sure that you're tailoring it to your program. And then one thing too that I kind of want to say on the reverse is a lot of third parties complete SIG questionnaires, other questionnaires. They have SOC 2 type 2s that they can provide. All of that documentation can also be leveraged from a third party to help complete your assessment. It may still give you all of the responses, even if you do have your own separate questionnaire.
Thank you. So you will join us a little later. We'll get to the rest of the questions. Very, thoughtful. I'm also tackling third-party risk management in my own company, so I'm learning a lot as well. So thank you, Nelson, for that. With that being said, we are now going to have a sponsor presentation, Shard Secure. Erwin, when you're ready, we are ready for you.
Great, thanks. Let me just share my screen. Please let me know if you can see my screen.
We can, and if you just want to switch it to presentation mode, we'll be ready for you. Just flip it to the other display setting when you have a chance. All right, you're good.
Anyway, thanks everybody for your time. Really appreciate being a new sponsor for the New York chapter. I'm Erwin Kim. I'm the regional manager supporting New York City and a couple other states. I also have Mark Blackmar, our VP of Marketing, on the line as well. I think it's an excellent presentation by Nelson on what kind of the risks are today, right? With geopolitical as well as third-party risks coming through. If we look at, things like SolarWinds, that hack basically was a third-party generated risk. So basically, ShardSecure is a software solutions platform provider. We have industry-leading digital market sharding technology, really, basically to make your data less sensitive. So wherever it is, whether it's in the cloud or it's on premise at rest, we can actually help make it less sensitive to those that might be bad actors, or also help actually meet some of the third-party guidelines that are discussed earlier today about destroying data, protecting it, sovereignty, as well as the geopolitical things that were discussed, what's going on with Russia and Ukraine. What we are seeing is we're hearing from customers and prospects that have operations in both of those countries, and they're pulling out. They actually have to destroy their data. So some of them are actually talking to us, wishing they had the technology before, where they could basically not have to worry because the data is useless, right? And that's really the nature of ShardSecure. Is if you look in the paper world, we kind of look at shredding paper into smaller pieces. We do that in a digital way. We make the data very small, little unreadable pieces that we can scatter them around and put them in different places and help actually customers better protect their environments. I think a lot of the market drivers that we've talked about and Nelson mentioned are really top of mind. I mean, data sovereignty, hacks coming in through third parties like SolarWinds. Also protecting your environment from internal and external threats, let alone third parties. What we're seeing is with the wide adoption of moving to the cloud, or in some cases, companies are only in the cloud, right? And that's where a lot of inherent risks are by nature exist. And SSL encryption and things like that are one method, but not enough in a lot of cases, right? So I think our inception as a company is really to help customers address those data sensitivity concerns and also help reduce risk from whatever attack vectors these risks are coming from, right? And I think we can be part of that vendor process where we can actually help make the data less sensitive and also have be a mechanism for destruction. Because basically what we do is we make the data unreadable as a storage target, and it's really transparent to the applications or the end users, right? And so compliance, risk management, third-party reduction, also resiliency was a great point that Nelson mentioned about having resiliency built in too. That's actually a part of one of the use cases where we'll help customers with multi-cloud environments where one cloud might go down, like in the case of Amazon, it's gone down many times for hours. Being able to recover and have resiliency to have your data in another location, another third party having access to it without the risk of breach and downtime, basically, right? So some of the use cases I think really already help protect your data, right? A lot of that has been mentioned by Nelson as part of the program. Our solution really can help map to confidentiality, integrity, and availability. The CIA triad, which people talk about, right, is a key component of protecting your data and being able to know where it is, what it's doing, and who's got access to it, and also be able to destroy or pull it back if you need to, like what's happening overseas. So I only have 5 minutes, but I think hopefully that is a good overview for you in terms of technology. If you look at, this is my one architecture slide of it, is really we're shredding the data where we make it unreadable unless you're actually using our software and have access to it. So we have actually customers that are have migrated to the cloud, and they're doing encryption, but they also are doing microsharding on top of it. And it's another added layer as well. And they don't actually have less worries about third parties accessing it, or in the case overseas where they need to destroy the data is less sensitive to begin with. And so we've actually helped customers solve issues around that. And actually we could be part of protecting from a vendor perspective of destroying the data as well as supplier termination. If they don't have certain mechanisms in to protect your data, we can actually help with that environment. So, you know, I think, I know it's only 5 minutes, but hopefully we have, you know, applicability to this session today. And Mark and I will be available if there's any questions on how our technology can relate to the panel. If you'd like, you can ask them as well. I'll be on. So
thank you, Erwin.
I'll leave it for any questions, or you know, any questions during the panel. Like, I'll be on for the whole time. And good luck, everybody, and happy St. Patty's Day.
Thanks, Erwin. So yes, if anyone has any questions, feel free to use the Q&A feature, and Erwin will answer your questions. With that being said, we are now going to move into our panel discussion, which we're really excited about. We're going to introduce Andrew D'Angelo as the moderator of the panel. So Andrew, when you're ready, you can come on.
Good afternoon, everybody. Just to kind of lead us in and echo Tim and Erwin's remarks, you know, we do definitely wish for peace and resolution in Ukraine as soon as possible. With that said, we do want to wish everyone a happy St. Patty's Day as well, and welcome you to our discussion. To kind of briefly step you through what we will cover here, I'm going to introduce our esteemed panelists, some of which you're already somewhat familiar with. We go into some Q&A just around the horn here. We do want to welcome questions from the group as well. We are monitoring the Q&A queue, so please keep them coming as the discussion evolves. And we'll wrap up with some final remarks. So just to kind of kick us off, you know, as we heard from Nelson, a lot of ground to cover with TPRM. It's really a discipline of disciplines that we kind of need to keep in motion at all times, just with the way things have evolved just throughout the IT ecosystem. You have an intersection of kind of perspectives, motivations, and things like that, all driving risk that you really need to be aware of as an organization. Everyone's kind of, you know, in their own place along the journey, right? I saw a discussion in the chat window around is there a maturity benchmark? There is. The Shared Assessments Vendor Risk Management Maturity Model, also known as the VROOM, is a very strong resource. So just refer to the chat if you're interested in learning more about that resource. But at the end of the day, while there is a lot of ground to kind of cover here, a lot of resources, as Nelson alluded, right? There's a lot of resources being dedicated to this. At the end of the day, it is just a risk assessment process, just like the rest of the disciplines that exist. You have a strong slant towards business enablement here. Your organization may want to introduce new or improved services for your customers or your employees, right? So you wouldn't be engaging third parties if it wasn't for that. So the process needs to be built to move in that kind of direction. So you have to establish your scope, right? Make sure you understand what vendors are relevant to the process, right? That actually do pose a risk to your organization. What information you're going to gather to assess that risk, and what are you going to do with the information? You have to treat your organization's risk appetite and culture with respect as well. And it has to be repeatable. So all that sounds easier said than done, which is why I'm joined by my esteemed colleagues here on the panel today to talk through some of the practicalities. So to briefly introduce everyone, we're joined by Megan Carlisle, Vice President from Fannie Mae in the Supplier Risk Management area, focused around information security. We have Aiden Nichols from DXC Technology as well, in the cybersecurity risk advisory area. And then, of course, we have Nelson Knight, who you're all pretty familiar, needs no introduction. So to kind of jump right into to the questions. Eden, if you wouldn't mind kind of leading us in, just kind of from an overall perspective here, how do we see, again, just looking at scoping, right? How do we see vendors just at the ground level sort of being quantified and triaged to be brought into the process? Aiden, you're on mute.
Sorry, I didn't understand if you were talking to me. So the question of how you look at the vendors, it's a tricky one, because they need to be screened. First of all, at least to what I see from my customer's standpoint, is that they want to screen them first of all in regards to their strategic objectives, and see how those vendors are aligned to them. First of all, how their practice and environments and reputations do align to the most important core directions of the company. To be honest with you, there is a bit of a difficulty there from an advisory standpoint, because not all organizations have their strategic goal in plain view, if you would, or do not align with the customers, the third party they actually need. So it's always a matter of a lot of compromise. And the things that we do make sure of are important to the customers are the contractual obligations. That's where the third party vendor is made the first pass with my customers or not, is whether or not they're willing to accept and honor the obligations that are put in the contractual the contracts that are signing.
Thanks. So you're really looking at the contractual negotiations and scoping out from that area to say, okay, here's the terms, here's the activities that are in scope for this engagement, right? And then learning from there and taking a risk-based approach then.
Yes, it's going to be a risk-based approach, at least from the initiation of the interaction with the vendor, because not knowing, well, you can look at certifications for the vendors. You can look at how the vendors basically are fulfilling all your strategic, or how they're going to fulfill your strategic objectives. But the most important one is definitely to put those constraints into the contract, because and especially because of the difference of maturities of different organizations in terms of risk and cybersecurity. There is a very real possibility that there's some kind of misunderstanding or misalignment, if you would, by either party as to what is expected. This is why I rely very heavily on legal to provide me with very strict regulations, strict contract requirements that are then discussed prior to the engagement with the third party.
Got it. Anything else, Megan and Nelson, to add before we jump into the next question?
I would just say, I think that's exactly right. I agree with what Aiden was describing. I think the trick is to balance as the vendor is coming through and looking at the risk that vendor potentially poses to the company. And there has to be some sort of a go, no-go decision even before you get to legal, right? Because as good as those contract provisions can be, they're just contract provisions. And so if the vendor is posing too much risk, yes, you may have some remediation or some ability to have some redress from the contract, But at the end of the day, you didn't want that thing to happen that you were trying to that you identified as part of the risk assessment process. So there's always a little bit of a tension between, well, we found this in the risk assessment. Are we comfortable moving forward? We know that we're going to have coverage in the contract, but is that okay? And I feel like that's sort of, a lot of this is just sort of an art, not a science. And it's tricky. It's tricky to know where that line is. And of course, typically you don't know until the thing happened that you didn't want to have happen. And then it's too late. So yeah, I just think it's not an easy balance.
Indeed. Otherwise, we wouldn't have very much to talk about and do this panel, right? So on that note, and Megan, maybe we'll keep you in the spotlight here, and we'll just talk a little bit about that's a dense exercise, right? When you have to do that, you're talking with the business, you're talking with your legal team, you're talking with IT and data handling perspectives as well. What kinds of information do you see, kind of just raw information gathering, right? To go through those different stage gates that we talked about. What do you see information-wise being gathered to kind of support that?
Yeah, because that's it, right? Because with most of these processes, if you don't get the right information coming in the door, then it can easily go off the rails. Like if you didn't get that critical piece of information, that you didn't know that there was a particular risk in that area. Well, if you didn't know they were going to have confidential information and you didn't assess it as having high access to confidential information, then everything else down the process is kind of, I won't say garbage in, garbage out, but it's easy to miss the boat, right? So when we're doing these risk assessments, we're relying, just as Nelson was talking about, we're relying on the business unit owner who's bringing in that third party to really help convey what is the service that third party is bringing. And so that can be you can be looking at RFP information. If there was a competitive bidding process, you can be looking at the information that procurement gathers, like basic information about what's the name of the company, what kind of services do they provide, what are they providing to us. In terms of a risk assessment and some of the inputs there, you can use some of the other third-party tools, like their whole plethora. There's Black Kite and BitSight and CyberGRX, and there are a number of different Supply Wisdom. There are a number of different tools out there that can give you additional information about that third party. And then talking to your domain experts within the company. So if you think there's going to be, and by a domain expert, I just mean like a subject matter expert. So if it looks like there might be confidential information, then you may want to pull in your privacy people. If it looks like there may be access to systems, you want to make sure that your information security folks are engaged. And that all kind of needs to be plotted out in the process so that you get the right touch points depending on the information that you're gathering. And that's why that information gathering step is so important. And there also needs to be a step down the way where you go back and you reassess, or you look at that third party again because things have changed, right? So you assess that vendor coming in with one capability. Oh, it worked really great. And now we've expanded. They didn't have access to confidential information before. Now they do. Whoops, we need to know that so that we can do that reassessment and we can make sure that we understand that we have the right protocols and the right restrictions in place for that new engagement. And that is hard. That's hard to fit in to the process.
It is, and you touched on a really interesting topic there as well, which is the sources of the data, right? Nelson earlier was speaking on some of these sort of initial triage processes. You're engaging with the business. You have different stakeholders that are all providing input as well. At the same time, right, a little creativity can go a really long way. Some of the other independent sources out there, it's 2022, the internet's been around for a while, and you have these organizations become very good at kind of aggregating this data, right? So a little bit of drawing from there can definitely short circuit some of those more difficult internal questions and really kind of accelerate processes. So I want to jump into one of the audience questions here. Nelson, maybe if you can take this one. What do you see your clients doing when you have when a vendor has talking about a high volume of PII or sensitive data? How do you see your clients handling breaches in that situation?
Yeah, I think you know, when it relates to privacy, it really is going to depend on the region of your customer. Your customer's information, where they live. Are they in California, or you have European customers? So you're gonna have to take a risk-based approach based off of the region related to it. But typically, what we would see is we see a lot more controls being put in place to really help make sure that, for one, if a third party has a data breach, that they're quickly notifying your organization, especially if your organization's data potentially could be impacted. You want to make sure that you're aware of it. And then I've seen some organizations, they want to make sure that they can control any notifications that they're required to send out to those individuals, that there's some collaboration between the third party and them to their customer base before that notification goes out. So I think it's still evolving. Like, there's definitely, from a legal standpoint, there's going to be language in the agreement of, how to notify, how quickly they need to notify. But one thing too is, from your organization's perspective, is do you have the right resources available to receive those notifications and to act, and really to understand what the impact of that data breach is to your company. Because that's really going to really drive kind of the next steps and what you need to do from a regulatory perspective to meet your obligations.
Good points. I think there's often a debate or a lot of attention paid in contracts to notification windows as well, and so that often is a topic, right? And I don't know that there's one necessarily cut and dry way to do that, but as long as you have, again, back to your culture and your risk appetite and how you want to approach your partners, right? Something interesting that comes out of that discussion as well is, when has your vendor confirmed that it is a breach, right, versus an event to be triaged? That to me is the biggest hurdle, right, in really trying to establish, okay, it should be 72 hours from a breach. Well, when exactly do you determine precisely it's become a breach? So a little bit trickier beneath the surface, this topic always, but good points, Nelson, thanks. Talk a little bit about automation. I think that's something a lot of folks are very excited to hear about. Nelson, I think you had a really good point earlier that technology should not define or drive your process. It should accelerate your process, and your process should be built on your business requirements and those sorts of things. So maybe why don't we pitch this one to Aidan and see what within your practices and just your travels in this field, what do you see as the most effective automation techniques supporting third-party risk?
So are you asking me to rate a technology or to provide my feedback on the process?
Yeah, which parts of the process benefit the most from automation? We'll start there.
Right. So I think that automation should not be introduced at least until a solid process has been established for governance and continuous improvement. The reason being is that I see a lot of my clients jumping the guns, both on cybersecurity and risk, to just find a quick fix for their problems. And then they find themselves in a position where they're absolutely blind, both on risk and cybersecurity, when crunch time comes in terms of breaches or finding the right solution for the risk approach. So a good place would be, after you have completed your your assessments, both on risk and cyber, and you have your strategic goals, and you have an ideal state that you're looking at implementing. You have a baseline to go to, right? So at that point, when you have a solid, say, frame that you can hang a technology into, that is the point when you can start introducing the automation. But I mean starting, because if you introduce it too fast, in my opinion, it takes over the process, and then it's all about fitting the requirements of the technology rather than following the process of risk and cybersecurity cycles. So it's a tricky balance that needs to be, it's a little bit of an experience hand on the tail if you want to go into that sort of
true. Hey, the shoe fits, right?
Yeah. So it does really need a little bit of balance, but that's not to say that technology isn't a great help when it comes down, especially for the risk associated with cybersecurity. It does provide a lot of visibility in a short time, and it's very fast. And when you were talking about breaches, there are certain areas of the world, like Europe, for instance, which in GDPR dictates. I can't remember the article, but there is an article in GDPR that actually dictates at which point your incidents become a breach, and you need to notify the regulators before anything else, otherwise you get fined. And those tools, those technologies do help you understand where the threshold is being reached. So, there's an argument and a good discussion to have as to when, but processes first, then technology.
So the moral of the story is the rumors you hear are true. This is one area to always go from the ground up.
Indeed.
So I'm going to jump to one of the other audience questions we had, which was the frequency around continuous monitoring. Should this be done annually or wait until the contract is up for renewal? So maybe to break this down a little bit into the sort of continuous monitoring that is done today or possible or could in theory be done from a process perspective. This is one where it's a good segue from the discussion we just had around technology driving the process, right? A lot of this, what's considered continuous monitoring is driven certainly by a lot of the leading tools that are out there. So names a lot of folks are familiar with. You have BitSight, Black Kite, Security Scorecard, RiskRecon, and others, right? So there's a lot of really exciting activity in the field, frankly. But again, unless you have a plan of what you're going to do with that information, you're leaving yourself susceptible to the whole situation we just described. So to offer one brief point, then I'll turn it around to the panel. Offer one brief point on the frequency. Really, this again depends on two main things. Number one, what is the sort of risk tier of your vendor in this area? Do you have something like a top 10 or a top 25? Not to use arbitrary numbers, because you may have a top 100, right? Depending on quite the size and scale that you're dealing with. But how wide are you casting this net is the first question, and what is the risk level of those vendors? Are you using it on the flip side, right, to address your low risk vendors instead of doing a more in-depth assessment? So that's the first question around scope. And then to break it down further is again, what are you going to do with that information? Are you going to use it to maybe trigger an assessment, trigger some other risk review activity, or just simply filter those results up through your GRC process and trigger some review or potential risk acceptance if things come up? So I don't know who from the panel would like to go first on this one, but to share any perspective that you see here.
Yeah, I can add a little bit here. I think one thing that, in terms of frequency, you definitely want to make sure that you're spending most of your time on those third parties that are, one, critical to your organization and present higher risk. So it'll be up to your organization to determine, is that on an annual basis? Is that every 2 years? that's kind of based off of like your resource capability and how many assessments you can perform. Should be taken into consideration as well. But what I will say is, because there's so much external data, like Andrew was just mentioning, that can really help in between your assessments, to make sure that you're monitoring and at least aware of what's going on with your third party. One of those alerts that you might get from your external data sources could be big enough that you need to re-trigger an assessment with that third party. That could be a triggering event. Perhaps your process is every time that they go for a contract renewal, you need to at least reassess the inherent risk score of that third party, of that relationship, to make sure that there's no new risk or additional risk that maybe wasn't considered before. That might be a trigger point to do a reassessment. And then, of course, when you have a third party that's providing one service, if they're going to start providing you a new service or a new product, you may need to trigger a new risk assessment off of that, because the risk could be different. It could be different technology. Did they do a pen test of that application, because it's different than the one that you assessed previously. So there's a lot of different things that can trigger a reassessment. But you want to have like a standard kind of methodology to say like, hey, at a minimum, we'll do this assessment every 2 years. But if one of these other triggering points happen, then we may do it more frequently.
Those are good points, Nelson. I think if we can throw in one more, I'm seeing a theme in some of the questions in the Q&A, just around the information that you get and some of the challenges sometimes that you get with vendor responses, right? So in a lot of situations, and I think most of us who practice third-party risk have seen this a couple of times probably, where you don't get quite everything you asked for on the first time around, or quite everything that is required to align with your programs, assessment work programs, et cetera. So, I'm not sure who from the group wants to kind of take this one first, but in a situation like a larger organization where they feel quite comfortable just giving you whatever they happen to have on file, how is that situation typically addressed to try to close those gaps?
I can take this one if you like. It's a tricky one, but I've seen it happen on many occasions. And I can give you an example of a very difficult situation in which, for instance, I have customers in Sweden that have vendors in Russia, and now the vendors in Russia are refusing to provide certain information based off, current geopolitical situations. The way it is approached is, we, following what Nelson said, to have a very good structure and a very good cycle that is very clear to all the parties right at the beginning of the contract. When it is a lot easier if you have that structure, so they know that it's coming and they are prepared, and they are, they do already know what the artifacts that we're looking for are. But when they start pushing back on providing and volunteering information that is required on their vendor assessment, then it becomes a matter of a little bit of tactical negotiations with the vendors, meaning that it is pretty clear that the vendor needs to be aligned to the strategic objectives that they have been engaged for, and we tried through several rounds of negotiations and several rounds of reviews to make it clear that the information is a vital request for the company they are providing their services to. Ultimately, though, I never seen a vendor really refusing flat out to provide information. There might be a little bit of wiggle room in terms of sometimes the questionnaires that are posed to the vendors seem to be going a little bit too deeper into the organization's structure. And so they pull out the blind of this is proprietary information to our company and blah, blah, blah. But ultimately, if you can fulfill one, the contractual requirements, and two, the requirements for the audits that of the, for instance, certifications you're supposed to fulfill, and you show that kind of documentation, then you can move forward. Tactical negotiations with vendors pushing away from providing that can be very, very tricky. And I had a couple of instances in which, contractual engagements were breached and we had to pull away. But that is, the very ultimate last stop.
Sure. That's right. Got it. So I think we have a little pocket for one final question from the audience. So, and this is an interesting one. So this is around sort of sub-organizations, if you will, or just, how regulators are quite focused on, of course, your third parties, right? There also is attention on organizations within your organization, right? So whether that's a sub-organization or just kind of intra-group, where there are maybe a special entity or something of that nature. So really just looking for any perspective on how this is addressed from a risk perspective. I think it's an interesting one and maybe worth a brief plug to the merger and acquisition side of the process. So some of these may or may not, right, may be a result of a merger acquisition activity. And something that we see a lot of activity with as well is the stepping up of due diligence in that area. It really, depending on your industry, right, there's going to be different levels of scrutiny and sort of underwriting, frankly, to go with that. So along that route, we see a lot of risk being documented there and serving as the basis for that. There's things like technology services agreement to kind of support those, I think, agreements that were being referenced in the question. So I think that, contracts here being a common theme or guiding light, that often is something that's used to kind of dictate, okay, here's the services that the central corporation is going to provide to you, right, with regards to IT or other, and here's the areas you're responsible for, and therefore you may be audited, right, all within the terms that are defined there. So opening that up to the panel, any perspective there to share?
So for us, that type of sort of risk assessment is done by our ERM, or enterprise risk management. And so each division has, we have a first, second, third line defense at Fannie. And so, our enterprise risk is looking at each of the divisions. So that's sort of your equivalent, a little bit of your intra-group. I saw that question as well. And I think that is, so there is a requirement where you are identifying your risks. There are sort of many audits being done by the second line, understanding what practices each of the business units are engaged in and what are their top risks, right? And so we go through these requirements routinely and work very closely with our enterprise risk management team. So it's different. It's a lot of the same concepts as the third-party risk management, but they're just applied internally to our own business units, where we have to, improve documentation, and there are, testing that has to be done by the second line to ensure that we did what we said we were going to do, when we have to provide documentation and information, just like we ask of our third parties. So we have to certainly take our own medicine internally as well, which is always a little bit painful, but it's the same concept. So if you don't have that practice within your organization, I think you can take the same third-party components and apply them internally. It's just a little bit of a different spin on the same concept, which is you're trying to surface risks and understand them. Can you remediate them? Do you have to risk accept them? If you risk accept them, is it for a temporary period of time? Can they be ultimately remediated, but you've got to get some other workarounds in place? Or you've just got to assess. it's that balance between treating each risk like an individual snowflake, right? Where we've got to assess it individually in all of its beautiful different dimensions, and having a consistent process where we can understand trending, understand where holistic risks are at a macro level. So it's what's kind of fun about third-party risk management is that you're flying in and out at the 50,000 foot level, and then you're down at the ground level, and you're kind of going up and down.
Thanks. I think that's the time we have for the panel. So to my esteemed colleagues, thank you. And I'm going to hand it back to Christina. It was a pleasure talking.
Thank you so much. I know we didn't get to every question today. If the panel has a little time to hang around, be great for you to answer some questions in the Q&A feature. But with that being said, we have our final sponsor presentation, and following that, a raffle prize. So if you want to win a prize, stick around. With that being said, I will introduce Brett Helm from Helm Cyber. Take it away, Brett.
Can you give me the access to the sharing screen, please?
Yes. Give us 1 second.
Hello, everybody. I'm Brett Helm. I'm filling in for Francine Panza today, and so forgive me for my.
Brett, you can share your screen now.
Yeah, I am. Can you see it?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm filling in for Francine Panza. I primarily work on new technologies, new products, and all of you that have cyber insurance, your world will change in the future shortly because questionnaires and filling out paper will not be sufficient in the future. And if any of you want to get a hold of me, I'm working with cyber insurance carriers, brokers, and some customers right now on products that will be required in the future. So with that said, let me move on to today. On February 28th, we presented to ISACA on the topic of securing data in motion, how data is most insecure when it's traversing the network, especially when you don't have visibility. And so today, we're going to be talking about securing customer data. Our system gives you capability, continuously monitor your network, giving you visibility. And of course, all of you say you can't secure what you can't see. And so when we look at the past 2 years, clearly we've had an on-ramp of future vulnerabilities based upon all of the IoT devices that are now accessible on your network. And so when we look at this, you have control over your customer network or customer application layer. All of you put EDR, which is fantastic, on your network. However, the layers below that, whether they're network layer, security layer, or IoT layers, if you get breached, you can't say, hey, I took care of the top layer. You're responsible for all of them. And having visibility into all of those is quite critical. And clearly our system, I wouldn't be here otherwise, provides all traffic and identifies exactly where your weak encryption, your databases are, et cetera. And you can see off to the far right, like we all know the target, and we all think of the target as an IoT vulnerability that was exploited. And in fact, many people don't know that there was additionally a database that was set up in the target infrastructure to exfiltrate their data. But you can see the other layers. There's continuously CVEs that are quite significant that are remote code execution, and you have no ability whatsoever to secure that information in those closed systems. If you think it's unusual and odd, here's a list of critical remote code executions during the last year. There are vendors that all of you have, all of you know, and unfortunately, it's a systemic problem. I'm going to skip through the SolarWinds. Here's an example of one of our financial customers. Now, all of you know where your database servers are. You all know where they're at, but knowing what your IP and your server isn't enough. You have to know what your database service names and your SIDs are and when they're operating. What we're showing you here is the ability where somebody can take and mimic with the nomenclature, a database, maybe on a different port, maybe on the same port. And so we have customers that require us to alert them anytime they have a new database up, even one that their own DBAs install, because these are the perfect environment to infiltrate and to examine where people are setting up staging databases to exfiltrate data. Next, we have a situation where we have third parties, IoT devices, just like the HVAC system, just like the IoTs at your home, much IoT at healthcare. But in this case, a large credit union has debit and credit cards that have pins put on them. It's a third-party application. It's like an IoT. It turns out they have weak SSL or TLS in there, which puts them at risk. And they had no visibility to this prior to us installing this kind of capability. So Helm Cyber specifically has many capabilities. And here are just some of the few things that we can do that you can't get anyplace else, including, and I want to emphasize, validating all of your digital certificates in your infrastructure. We've installed yesterday alone 2 or 3 customers where they almost ran out of the room because their LDAP was unencrypted, and being able to see what's going on in infrastructure is quite important. And so with that, I'm not going to take the full 5 minutes. I'm going to end short. There is my contact. There is Francine's contact. We would be thrilled to connect with you, whether it be on the insurance capabilities or whether it be on visibility within your infrastructure. Thank you very much for your time. And I'm an amateur at this, but I hope it was brief. Thank you.
Not at all. Not an amateur at all. Thanks, Brett. With that being said, we will do a raffle for the sponsor presentations, and that'll end our presentation. So Sam, if you're ready, let's do the fun part and we'll end the event.
Sure. I'll start in a minute. So before I start the raffle, I just want to remind all the members, there was a survey sent out to you for our Gala event, which will be in June. Please fill out that survey and send it back to us. The deadline is tomorrow. We need your feedback to organize the event. And stay tuned, we will be getting back to you on the dates and avenues for the Gala. And today we have 2 prices from our sponsors. There's a $100 gift card from Helm Cyber and a $50 gift card from Short Secure. So I will be spinning the wheel shortly. Trying to share my screen. Do you see the correct, Christina?
Yes, it's up now.
Okay, got it. It's working little. So here we go for the first prize. Vijay Bolanpalli. So Vijay, congratulations on your $100 gift card. Now I'm gonna spin the wheel for the second $50 gift card from Short Secure. Richard Barron. Congratulations, Richard. We will be reaching out to both of our winners with the gift card. That's it for today. I thank you everyone for taking out time for today's presentation. If you have any, we will also be sending out the survey for today's event. Please take out your time. Your feedback is very important to us. And as Christina mentioned earlier, we will be sending out the CPE certificate for this event within 3 to 4 business days. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great evening. Enjoying St. Patty's Day.
Enjoy St. Patrick's Day.
Em, you and I have to go hang out.
Yes. Oh, you are in city?
I'm close by. Thanks, Sam. Bye,
Thanks.
everyone.
Okay. Bye, everyone.